Hey Arnold changed the landscape of Nicktoons when it premiered as a series back in 1996. Before that, Nickelodeon was known for shows like Rugrats, Rocko's Modern Life, and Ren and Stimpy, all cartoons that were known for zany antics, hyperbolized situations, and plenty of goofs and gags. Compared to those shows, Hey Arnold was different, but in a really good way. Drawing inspiration from northern cities of Seattle, Portland, and Brooklyn, New York in both its setting and characters, creator Craig Bartlett, who's actually related to Simpsons and Futurama creator Matt Groening, focused on using inspiration from his real-life experiences when creating Hey Arnold. The show's pilot was aired before Nick's first live-action movie, Harriet the Spy. While Harriet completely tanked in reviews, the pilot, simply titled Arnold, was a massive hit and was greenlit for a series on Nickelodeon. The pilot itself was a callback to a comic strip that Bartlett drew back in October of 1991 that was featured in Simpsons Illustrated magazine. It also would later be developed into the Season 1 episode, 24 Hours to Live. To sum it up, the story follows Helga egging on Harold to beat up Arnold, but Arnold pretends to be crazy and Harold ends up inviting him to join their club as the plan backfires right in Helga's face. The entire premise of the show usually revolves around the fact that Arnold wholeheartedly is a good person who always believes in helping others and doing the right thing. With that in mind, the show always has a way of teaching valuable life lessons in almost every episode. Today, we're going to take a look at the top 5 episodes of Hey Arnold that taught us important life lessons. But first, thank you very much for clicking on this video. My name's Sean and welcome to my channel. If you like this video, make sure you hit that like button, consider subscribing for more awesome videos like this one, and let's get right into it. Number 5. Arnold Betrays Iggy. This episode begins with Arnold, Sid, and Stinky talking about how Iggy is the coolest kid in their class, as Arnold is walking to Iggy's house to drop off Iggy's homework because he missed school that day. When Arnold gets to Iggy's house, he finds Iggy watching TV on the couch while wearing some embarrassing bunny pajamas.
Arnold? Iggy? Arnold? Iggy? Arnold, what are you wearing? Nothing. Forget it. Didn't see anything.
Arnold promises not to tell, but the next day at school, Sid and Stinky somehow end up guessing what had happened. Then they tell the entire class, who ends up ridiculing Iggy. Arnold, who has a really strong moral compass, feels really guilty about everybody finding out. Arnold ends up doing everything he can to try to earn Iggy's forgiveness, but nothing works. Eventually, Iggy agrees that he will forgive Arnold if Arnold walks out in front of everybody wearing the same pajamas that Iggy was wearing when Arnold saw him. Arnold agrees, very begrudgingly, but when the event occurs, Iggy overhears Sid and Stinky talking about how it wasn't actually Arnold's fault and that they pulled the truth out of him, which makes Iggy realize that Arnold completely doesn't deserve to go through this humiliation. But unfortunately, it's too late, and Arnold already makes the walk of shame in those embarrassing pajamas. The episode ends with Iggy apologizing profusely and trying to earn Arnold's forgiveness back. There's a few life lessons that we could learn from this episode. First is that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Making Arnold face an even more humiliating situation than Iggy did really didn't help fix the situation at all. It also taught us about how easily something can spread when it's said in confidence. All it took was Stinky and Sid finding out the secret to lead to the whole school knowing. I feel like this also rings true for the internet. When you post something online, it stays there forever, and all it takes is one person finding out something embarrassing you posted online in your past that can really have a devastating effect on you. Number 4. The High Life. This episode focuses on Arnold's best friend Gerald, attempting to earn money to buy a fancy pair of rollerblades. He sees an ad urging kids to become salesmen for Wacko watches, which turns out to be a small-scale pyramid scheme where Mr. Wacko gives the kids more watches than they could possibly sell, and their parents have to pay to dig them out of the hole. Gerald, being an excellent salesman, lives the high life for a few days. At one point, Gerald actually ends up playing 4 games at once at an arcade like an absolute baller. Eventually, after selling to absolutely everybody in town, Gerald runs out of customers. When he ends up in over his head, Arnold gives him the idea to use reverse psychology to trick Mr. Wacko into buying all the watches back from Gerald at double the cost, which just so happens to be enough money for Gerald to break even. I can relate to this episode on a personal level. I used to be a door-to-door salesman for a massive corporation. I was pretty good at it too, but when COVID struck, door-to-door salesman became a thing of the past. This episode taught us a few things. Be wary of becoming dependent on one thing for income, because it isn't impossible for that well to run dry. It also taught us to look out for pyramid schemes, MLMs, and marketing schemes in general. They are all too prevalent in this day and age, and it's easy to get sucked in if you don't know what signs to look out for. Number 3. PartTime Friends. This episode starts with Arnold and Gerald talking about how they wish they had a way to earn more money. At that exact moment, they see Mrs. Vitello, who owns the flower shop, put a help wanted sign in the window of her shop. They end up being hired to work at the flower shop, just completely defying all child labor laws, when Mrs. Vitello throws her back out, which makes the most heinous sound.
My back!
Mrs. Vitello, are you all right?
Yeah, I think I'm... Oh!
Arnold and Gerald are left in charge of the shop for a week while she recovers. Arnold is in charge of the plants and the creative side, while Gerald is in charge of the organizing and basically being the boss. Arnold gets jealous of Gerald being the boss, and Gerald lets his boss status go to his head. Arnold quits his job at the shop, and the two of them stop being friends. After talking to his grandpa, Arnold has a terrifying dream about a future where him and Gerald are now elderly and still aren't friends.
What did I tell you, short man?
When he wakes up from the dream, he runs straight to the flower shop where Gerald is being yelled at by a Karen for the awful flower arrangement that she received. They resolve their issues and go back to working together. This episode was full of valuable lessons, such as the value of friendship, why it's bad to hold a grudge, and why you should never let a little bit of power go to your head. Number 2, Pigeon Man. As this episode begins, Arnold is sending one of his carrier pigeons, Chester, to bring Gerald a note. Chester ends up fainting midair and coming down ill. Sid suggests that Arnold bring his bird to the Pigeon Man, a hermit who lives on top of an old abandoned building with a flock of pigeons that he cares for. All of the kids believe that Pigeon Man is some kind of psychopath, but Arnold doesn't care. He just wants to get Chester the help that he needs. Pigeon Man tells Arnold to come back the next day while he cures Chester, which he does. When Arnold comes back the next day to pick up Chester, he has a conversation with Pigeon Man, who explains that he doesn't trust people and he doesn't miss the world outside of his rooftop. But Arnold makes him realize that there is one thing that he does miss: pizza.
Don't you ever miss the outside world? Like movies and TV and pizza?
Pizza. Oh, pizza.
Pigeon Man and Arnold end up going to a pizzeria to have lunch. While they're away, a group of kids decides to go to the rooftop and wreak havoc, completely destroying everything up there. When Arnold and Pigeon Man come back to find out what had been done, Pigeon Man explains that it's time for him to move on and be somewhere where he can live in peace with his friends. In a very emotional ending, Pigeon Man ends up thanking Arnold for teaching him that some people can be trusted, and he flies off into the sunset, being carried by his pigeons. This episode taught us the value of being tolerant of others and not judging someone just because they're different. It taught us that you shouldn't hate what you don't understand, and you should treat others with respect and compassion. We all have a different walk of life, and should do our best to treat others with respect, regardless of a differing opinion. Number 1, Stoop Kid. This episode might just be the most iconic Hey Arnold episode of all time. It begins with Arnold kicking a football, and it just so happens to land on Stoop Kid's stoop. Stoop Kid is an orphan who was left on the stoop of a building as a young child. He basically raised himself and spends every day on this stoop, harassing people that walk by and beating up anybody who even dares step foot near his property. Arnold ends up sneaking up to his stoop and taking his football back. Having realized that Stoop Kid's afraid to leave his stoop, the entire town ends up making fun of him after fearing him for so long.
Stoop Kid's scared to leave his stoop. I'm spreading the word.
Hey! Stoop Kid's afraid to leave his stoop! Stoop Kid's afraid to leave his stoop!
Arnold ends up hearing Stoop Kid openly sobbing because he's being made fun of, and Arnold decides that he's going to help Stoop Kid finally take the first step off of his stoop. Word quickly spreads that Stoop Kid is going to leave his stoop, and the entire town gathers to rally behind him, cheering him on as he finally takes that first step off of the stoop. In the end, even though he can leave, he decides that he doesn't want to leave just yet. The biggest lesson that Stoop Kid learned is that now he can harass people from on his stoop and off of his stoop. The lesson that we learned, though, is very similar to that of Pigeon Man. Some people are misunderstood and shouldn't be ridiculed for it. All it took is a little bit of kindness and compassion to get Stoop Kid to overcome his fears. It also taught us to embrace new things, not to keep yourself in a box, and just because something makes you uncomfortable doesn't always mean that it's going to be a bad thing. Thanks again for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you click that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any more of my awesome videos just like this one. You can follow me on Twitter as well at DuskTillShawn9, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.